Hey students, Mr. Hendricks here. I've got a few things I want to share with you and uh, felt like this would be the best way to do it. So we'll go over a few things. I'll actually use some PowerPoint this time for this video here in just a moment. It's going to be exciting, so you want to buckle up your seatbelt because it's going to be a wild ride. But I can officially tell you now, because it's hit the news media outlets, even though I've known for a few days, that we will be distance learning through the remainder of the semester. I don't think that's much of a surprise. We'll see what January brings. Without any further ado, I want to go ahead and jump into this. I'm going to share my screen. I'm getting kind of good at this here, I think. I wanted to talk to you really quickly about the 1824 election. So the 1824 election, you have four major candidates that were vying for the presidency. So you had John Quincy Adams, William Crawford, Henry Clay, and Andrew Jackson. All four claimed to be Democratic Republicans. Why? Well, because we were kind of coming off of what we call the era of good feelings. I'm going to show you a graphic here that I'll show you part of it, and I'll come back to it later. But this what we call this era of good feelings is really kind of a misnomer. It's not that we have a lot of political harmony, it's that we really had a lot of political singularity, that there was really only the Democratic Republican Party that was operating for quite a while there with very little political opposition, because really as of the Hartford Convention, the Federalist Party is done with. And so we kind of looked at that Hartford Convention there, part of the War of 1812. It's kind of being the death knell for the Federalist Party. I would actually say that really the death of the Federalist Party, I'd put that right here, 1804. Okay, death of Alexander Hamilton really kind of sets off that downward slide of the Federalist Party. And so the Democratic Republicans not only become a majority, but really they kind of become the only party that we have for a while. I'll come back to the rest of this in a moment. And so the election of 1824 is really going to formally put an end to that era of good feeling. So let's look at why, okay? So in 1824, Andrew Jackson won the popular vote. A lot of you chose to answer a question about that coming out of the textbook, which is good. Nobody won a majority of the electoral votes, and so the election therefore goes to the House of Representatives. And so you know what happens from there, right? Under the 12th Amendment, they have to choose among the three leading candidates. Speaker of the House Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams both supported Clay's American system, which you've read about. I've had you identify that. So Clay throws his support behind JQA, and then of course, and a lot of you, kudos if you answered this. Henry Clay gets picked as the new Secretary of State. Why is that important? Well, it's an awesome position. I mean, for a long time, Secretary of State was that springboard position to the presidency, okay? So according to Jackson's supporters, Adams had basically bribed Clay with the position, and so they, all of Jackson's supporters denounced it as a corrupt bargain, all right? So there's that corrupt bargain component to all that. John Quincy Adams, as Secretary of State, had been pretty much a rock star. I mean, his Secretary of State resume is pretty dang awesome. You know, as far as the Rush-Bagot Agreement, the British-American Convention, the Adams-Onis Treaty, really carrying out the Monroe Doctrine, which was our overarching foreign policy that was in place, man, all the way up to World War II. But as president, JQA really never really got going. You know, he never really had any major support. There was the charges of corruption that were hanging overhead, and so just like his dad, JQA becomes a one-term president. And so, you know, the 1824 election really, again, kind of brought that into the era of good feelings. National Republicans go with Adams, Democrats go with Jackson, and I'll come back to that graphic here in just a moment. The election of 1828 is a lot different. So we see a lot of different sectional results. Jackson absolutely destroys JQA in the rematch. Jackson becomes the first president from the West, and this is one of those things I kind of want to focus on here. Is he really is seen as the president of the common man. A lot of people really identify with him. You know, when they're looking at some of these other people that are involved, and they look at Jackson, the hero of the Battle of New Orleans from the War of 1812, a guy who was once attacked by somebody, and he beat the assailant with his cane. You know, a lot of people looked at Jackson and said, you know, that's my guy. He's more like me than anybody else. And there's some things that kind of help perpetuate that. And one of those is that the process a lot of times we refer to as democratization, in which a lot of states eliminated property requirement or property qualifications for voting. So you can look here in 1800, how many states had property qualifications in place. By the time we get to 1830, or essentially the election of 1828, we see the removal of a lot of that. So you have more people participating in the political process. It's a lot of P alliteration there, right? But you get the point. And so when Jackson is inaugurated, it's really seen as a victory for the common man. A lot of people are like, hey, this guy's just like me, puts his pants on one leg at a time. Tons of people turned out for his inauguration. So a lot of the people really feel like Jackson is their president because they sort of had a hand in electing him. So we see some political changes here. From 1790 up to 1828, we had what was known as the caucus system. A lot of places actually still use that for primaries. They use the caucus system. It's not used everywhere. It's mostly kind of a back east thing. After 1828, we see the shift towards more what we use today, which is the party conventions, in which members from political parties nominate the candidates. Some conventions are pretty memorable. Other ones, not as much. The spoils system, which had been in place for a long time. There's always been a little bit of political favoring that's gone on. The spoils system is rewarding political supporters with public office. I'm not really going to get into the details of that. I think you can. I think you probably read about some of this in your textbook. I hope. If you didn't, go back on the online textbook there at the Bedford Freeman Worth and Fabric of a Nation and read that. But Jackson really defended it on democratic grounds, and because he defended it, he used it prolifically. Okay, and so a lot of times what happens, especially under an administration like Jackson's, when how he did business, where with the use of his kitchen cabinet versus the official cabinet, corruption and ineffectiveness really kind of rule the day. All right. So we see that there's an enormous downside to that, and we'll actually talk later about how the spoils system really comes to an end and the tragedy that's involved in that. Election of 1832, you can see it's an absolute landslide with Jackson walking with not only 76% or 219 electoral votes, but also just absolutely crushes the popular vote. And then, I mean, look at this. It's an anti-Masonic party, really? Okay, anyway. It's a political party for everything. Then you get this big thing that's looming over everything that I really wanted you to know about, and that's the Tariff of 1828. It's part of the nullification crisis. Northerners like it. Southerners hate it. And so here we go. Sectionalism is on the rise again. So we already saw sectionalism with the Hartford Convention. Now you're seeing it here, only we flipped from a northern sectionalism down to a southern sectionalism. And so the Southerners referred to the Tariff of 1828 as the Tariff of Abominations. And so the vice president at the time, major South Carolina guy, John C. Calhoun, actually published a pamphlet called the South Carolina Exposition, or South Carolina Exposition and Protest. Spoiler alert, it's the next document you're going to read. The nullification theory, of course, is that a state has the right to, whether or not to obey a federal law or nullify it. So go back to the Sedition Acts or the Kentucky and Virginia Resolution while Jefferson was VP. That's that same thing, right? So talking about what states have the right to do versus the federal government. McCulloch versus Maryland, which I'll actually mention that again here in just a moment. And so another tariff was passed by Congress in 1832. Again, South Carolina is not happy. But the nullification was approved, and the tariff would not be collected in South Carolina. And look at this: they threatened secession if there were any attempts to collect. Keep that under your hat, okay? South Carolina is the one that is barking heavily, loudly about secession. Okay, South Carolina's not happy. That's going to come back. Okay, just make sure you're aware of that. I think there's actually something that spoils it here in just a moment. Yep, there it is. Okay, so Jackson is not a fan of the tariff, but he wanted to defend the Union. So he says, if the federal government makes a decision, that's what they do. The federal government has the final say, whether I like it or not. And so he kind of starts spouting off about the olive branch and the sword. That nullification would not be tolerated. And so Henry Clay helps negotiate a compromise tariff in 1833 that comes in at a lower tariff rate. That's the olive branch. Okay, that's that offering of peace, the compromise tariff of 1833. The sword is the force bill, and the force bill says that the army, okay, the military, the federal government would collect the tariff. So now we're going to use the army to collect duties at ports. Really? Okay. But because of the compromise tariff, the nullification was rescinded. The Union is preserved temporarily, right? Why? Because, big spoiler, South Carolina is going to be the state that leaves the Union in 1860 when President Lincoln gets elected, and they go, "He's not my president," and they left. Okay. We see major population growth in the era leading up to what we are kind of talking about right now, which is the Jacksonian era, right? Another thing that happens under Jackson's administration is the Indian Removal Act of 1830. So the tribes are forced to leave their land and move west of the Mississippi River. Where do we move them to? The crappiest land we can find, okay? Oklahoma, where the wind comes, right? Okay, Oklahoma, Indian word, means crappy red dirt, I think. No, that's not actually true, but might as well, right? I mean, who wants to live here? Oh, I guess all of us do, right? So results of the Indian Removal Act, I'll go through this pretty quickly. Jackson's policy ends up uprooting thousands of Native people. The Seminoles literally fight back. The Cherokees use the court systems. Webster versus Georgia, by the way, that's pronounced, I believe you guys are like Worcester, Webster, okay? Webster versus Georgia. Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, Cherokee Nation versus the United States. On Webster versus Georgia, it's John Marshall determines that the Cherokee cannot be forced to be moved by the federal government. Jackson, in typical Jackson fashion, why this guy's on the $20 bill, it's beyond me, but he chose to ignore the federal court's decision. He said, John Marshall has made his decision, let him enforce it if he can. I mean, wow. Okay, I'll just leave that there. So the Trail of Tears, so about 100,000 plus Cherokees are forced to leave their ancestral home in Georgia and move to Oklahoma. Make sure you're paying attention to what that is like. I'm pretty sure the textbook is going to go into some detail on that. Pay attention to how people died. Okay, there's not a lot of like murder. Nobody's actually dying directly at the hands of Union soldiers or anything like that. Or federal troops on the Trail of Tears. Make sure you know that. Okay, for your next upcoming exam. Then there's the bank thing. So one of the things I had you guys, the most recent thing I had you read was the opposing viewpoints talking about the bank. So Andrew Jackson versus Daniel Webster. So in 1816, Congress had given a 20-year charter to the Bank of the United States, effectively making it the second Bank of the United States since it had been rechartered. Congress, again, was going to reapprove charter in 1832. Clay, because that's part of his American system, he's a big proponent of that. And Clay had really wanted to make it an issue of the election of 1832, in which he was running yet again for president. Um, Jackson goes ahead and uses his presidential veto power and vetoes the recharter of the Second Bank of the United States. Some people really started accusing him of exercising too much power. Okay, talking about the same guy who says that the Supreme Court made their decision, and let them try to enforce it. All right. Because remember, the Supreme Court had already declared the bank to be constitutional all the way back with McCulloch versus Maryland. Not a big surprise. Who was the big proponent of the bank at the time? Alexander Hamilton, leading up to his death in 1804. He was what? A Federalist. John Marshall, a Federalist. Okay, so no big surprise there. Jackson really was a sort of an abuser of the veto, the golden power of veto that he had. If you're watching Big Brother, I don't really watch it. It's just always on because my wife watches it, but during the summer. He used the power of veto more times than any of the previous presidents combined. So he really liked having that power at his fingertips. He was pretty well drunk on power. And so, there's a lot of steps that had been taken to try to destroy the power of the bank prior to 1836. And one of those things was that Jackson had ordered that all federal funds be withdrawn in 1833, and they placed them in what we call pet banks. And those pet banks are what those are. Is those are state-run, locally controlled, basically regional banks. Rather than having one large bank, you have these regional banks. Again, this is one of those things that's really interesting. Kind of keep this in mind because fast forward not quite 100 years from 1833 with regional banks, and we kind of see how some of that kind of comes back, kind of bite us there as a nation, a lot of different ways. So what is Bank President Nicholas Biddle? He goes ahead and just calls in the loans on that as sort of his response to that, which really results in a lot of widespread economic uncertainty. Not only do you have the pet banks, but you also have something else. You have something called the Specie Circular, which gets issued in 1836, that required that all public land, okay, we're talking about public land that's being purchased, so that land out west has to be purchased with gold or silver, in other words, hard currency. So no paper money, no promissory notes, none of that stuff. It's got to be, it's got to be coin in hand on that Specie Circular. The pet banks and the Specie Circular and basically the defeat of the recharter of the bank after Jackson leaves office in 1837, it really kind of leads to what we call the Panic of 1837, and it's going to really introduce us to an economic cycle where it seems like just about every decade for the remainder of the 19th century we're going to talk about the Panic of. So you kind of get used to hearing these. This term. We've actually already had one previously during the Jefferson administration, economic downturn, but I don't want to chase that rabbit right now. So the Panic of 1837 is caused by overspeculation of Western lands. It's caused by the Biddle's bank battle. There's another, it's more fun alliteration. The Specie Circular, things like that. So in 1836, everybody looks to Martin Van Buren, another Democrat, very highly favored, sort of Jackson's heir apparent. Van Buren does really well, picking up 57.8% of the electoral votes, does pretty darn well as far as gaining the majority in the popular vote, even though we do see a lot of people involved here. You might notice that you've got Van Buren as the Democrat, and you've got Whig, and then Mangum, who's the independent Democrat. So go back to my, I'll do this graphic first. Sorry, I forgot this graphic was in there. So really, we end up with kind of two major political parties at the time. We have the Democrats, okay, who had been formerly known as the Democratic Republicans. The Republicans kind of split off from that, and the Republicans sort of morph into this Whig party. But I want you to notice something. I don't know how much you guys actually pay attention to what different political parties stand for today, but the Democrats at the time were all about a small national government. So government is best, which governs least. It's kind of that Jeffersonian kind of idea that the federal government should really kind of stay out of economic affairs and social issues. So there's actually a term we use for that. It's laissez-faire. French term means basically hands off or stay out of it. They're really strong in the South and the West and amongst workers in urban areas. A lot of this small government and government kind of staying out of things, those are the major hallmarks today of the Conservative Party, what we call today's Republican Party. Whereas the Whigs at the time favored a strong central government. So, this would be kind of sort of the newer Federalists, who were really at the time that the Federalist Party came around, the time of ratification of the Constitution, they were really more considered to be the kind of the radicals and not the conservatives, where we're kind of seeing a little bit of that shift there. They favor a strong central government. They supported Clay's American system, that three-pronged system for building up the wealth of the United States. They tended to support public schooling, more reform movements. A lot of them were behind some of the things like the prohibition movements that were being driven mostly by women at the time. They were stronger in New England, stronger among Protestants. And so some of the things that we see today with today's Democratic Party would be that, the strong or large centralized government, lots of public programs, things that eat a lot of tax dollars, the tax and spend sort of mindset of today's Democrats. And so you're thinking, okay, well, when does this shift take place? Well, it's a gradual shift. It doesn't happen all at once, but pretty much by the time we get to about the 1930s, we will have seen pretty much a complete turnover as far as which party represents conservative ideas and which side is more liberal. Okay, so it's kind of a fun study if you ever want to do it. If you're into that sort of thing. A lot of you probably aren't, but some of you might be. So back to this graphic, because I told you we would come back to this. So again, we had the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. There was that split where Jefferson and Hamilton, not Hamilton, my bad. Jefferson and Madison sort of jumped from the camp of the Federalists over to the Democratic Republicans. A lot of that had to do with the arrogance of Hamilton and some of those things. There's a lot of infighting there. We see the Revolution of 1800, which really kind of opens the door for Democratic Republicans. And once we get to 1804, the death of Hamilton, all the way to the Hartford Convention that becomes the death knell for the Federalists. And so we really end up with really only one political party there for a while, which we call the era of good feelings, not because it was harmonious, just as there wasn't a lot of opposition. And then what happens with the 1824, with the corrupt bargain, we see that split. And so the Democrats are thus forth known from 1828 on as just Democrats. The National Republicans will split off. They become the Whigs. And the Whigs will eventually kind of morph into the Republican Party when Abraham Lincoln gets elected in 1860 as the first Republican president. So that's really how we end up with a two-party system in the United States. Love it or hate it or find yourself somewhere in between, it's really kind of the reality that we have. We've maybe tried to do other things to try to create more plurality, but we always end up defaulting to a two-party system. George Washington had really kind of warned us against forming any of those factions to begin with. Madison had tried to do everything he could to make sure that our system of government really sort of weakened the power of factions, but we see how that always finds a way to rear its ugly head, and usually every time we're in election season, and you get to the point where you just get kind of tired of it. But we've actually had elections that were a lot meaner than some of the ones we've seen recently. And I'm going to stop there. I'm not going to get into all that stuff. I might say that for another one. I didn't want to keep you on here too long. I just wanted to take a moment to talk about some of those things for you. Really, here's where we're at. And we're on distance learning. We're sort of wrapping up the semester. I've got really one more maybe major document type of assignment I want you to look at. And then really what we need to do is I need to give you another test. So this will be the period 4 test. So you've got the period 4 reading and study guide. Okay, this is a major help. Know the who, what, when, where of all these different things here. Make sure you're paying attention to any document that I've had you read. Study and prepare for that test. Do well on it. I'll probably introduce some things from period 5, but we're not going to complete period 5 just because we're not really going to have time. I do want to do a few lessons for you regarding writing. It's something I've been putting off. I was going to wait till we were in class, and we've had so many false starts. We've never really gotten into class. For some of you, most of you I've met once. Okay. There it is. So we'll try to talk about some writing stuff. But the other thing, and I'll put all this stuff in writing too, just in case, but so you can see it, is I'm going to do a comprehensive exam. Okay. I'm going to do the comprehensive reassessment for AP, or CRAP. And I'm going to give you a crap, and you're going to, if you want to, you can take a crap, because I'm going to give a crap, and I give a crap. Why? Because I give a crap. But it's the point of that comprehensive exam is it's comprehensive. So it's kind of a mixture of everything that I've tested you over so far. But if you do really well on that, you can replace your lowest test score, which is kind of a nice little thing. You may be wondering about final exams. Well, I'm not really giving you a final exam in the traditional sense. Because they kind of just said, okay, that's off. We're not doing the comprehensive final exam. It's worth 20% of your grade. They just kind of, they killed that. So I'm going to do the crap and allow you to replace your lowest test score with it, as sort of kind of like a final exam, and sort of just another opportunity for a redo. Okay. Because some of you may not have done so well on these exams that you do at home, where I can't watch you do it, and I can't tell you to put your notes away. And I hope you're picking up what I'm laying down here. I don't think I can make that any easier for you. So all that said, I didn't want to keep you any longer than this. So just, stay in communication with me. If you need something, reach out to me. If you got a question, please ask. I love answering them. And just don't forget that, as always, you are loved and you are never alone. So love you guys. See you later.